Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to NYMTC's first of two public webinars on the adjusted 2055 socioeconomic and demographic forecasts. My name is Mark Maglianti. I'm with NYMTC's technical group, and I'm joined by Tina Lund of Urbanomics, who is the lead consultant on this project.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Thank you. And we will be going over some background information to try to set some context for what the SED forecasts are, how they're developed, how they're used, their coverage, and then we'll talk about in more detail about what the actual this adjustment is, why it was being done, how it was being done, and then we'll go delve into some of the actual numbers and do some comparisons. And there will be time at the end for some comments. If you have comments during the presentation, you can just type them into the chat and we will collect them from that point. So just real quick, NYMTC, of course, if you don't know, NYMTC is the Metropolitan Planning Organization for the New York City Metro region. It consists of 9 voting members and 7 advisory members, and collectively they come together as a council to review and plan out transportation planning in the region. And as the federally recognized MPO for the region, they exist to secure federal funding and gain federal approvals for projects in the region. Next slide. Yeah.
Sorry.
That's okay.
There we go.
Yeah. So the forecasts themselves, they are a requirement of federal requirement that MPOs must develop to study the economy and the population in the region. They project 30 to 35 years into the future and are produced every 4 years. Next slide. And primarily, the forecasts are integral, or a fundamental input into our travel demand forecasting model, the New York Best Practice Model, or BPM. This is a activity-based travel demand model. And from that model, the results from that model can support elements of the regional transportation plan. And the forecasts themselves also are used in the plan for studies on patterns and trends. And when using the BPM, they also serve as a base for project and regional, sub-regional level analyses that might be done using the travel demand model. And again, they also provide a common analytical framework for environmental and technical analysis for certain regulatory requirements such as conformity and congestion management. A little bit, zooming in a little bit closer on that modeling approach, just showing you exactly how these forecasts are being used. The data is an integral piece of the BPM, like we said. And what happens is the data is entered into the model, and the model, as an activity-based travel demand model, actually simulates the region's population. And from that simulated population, it is distributing the movement and the actions taken and the travel taken by that simulated population onto a transportation network in the region. And the outputs of the model then end up being total trips taken from one place to another on individual links in the region. So it's a very powerful model and demonstrates the activities and the movement of a simulated population, but it's ultimately coming from this SED set of SED forecasts. From those trips, if we have the length of the link that the trips are being taken on, we can determine the vehicle miles traveled, or the model determines the vehicle miles traveled and the vehicle hours traveled. And from those pieces of data, we can take it one step further and conduct additional analyses, like generating the motor vehicle emissions from those miles traveled for things like conformity, or identify segments of congested roadways for our congestion management steps to planning projects in the future on those locations. Next slide. More generally, the forecasts do shape the interaction between transportation investments and development patterns. and they're used to evaluate historical recent trends and help predict future trends, both from the model and from the actual forecasts themselves. They can be used in local and regional policy development and help plan for infrastructure investments to accommodate anticipated growth. They support policies and planning for air quality, such as conformity, as we said. Next slide. And they give planners the information that are needed to address expected congestion, like we said, from the results of the model, identifying those congested areas and focus planning efforts on those locations. And they're not just for transportation planning, but also for various other public and private sectors. Next slide. So the area that the forecasts are developed for are certainly the NYMTC's MPO 10 county boundary, which you see in purple there. But the travel demand model extends beyond that boundary, and so the forecasts do as well. And that includes 3 counties in Connecticut, 4 additional counties in southern New York, and 14 counties in New Jersey, all making up the region of study. Next slide. The process of developing the forecasts is overseen and takes place with guidance from the forecasting working group, which is a group that's convened by NYMTC as a council, and it consists of representatives from all of NYMTC, all the NYMTC members, as well as folks from Connecticut and from New Jersey, and our federal partners, of course. And they oversee all steps and reach concurrence on all steps of the forecasting process. Next slide. And now we'll pass it to Tina to go into more detail about the actual forecasts themselves. Tina.
Thanks, Mark. So first off, we do have a set of valid adopted 2055 SED forecasts. They were created based on a 2017 data baseline. They were lagged to reflect the COVID-19 pandemic slowdown, and PFAC, the Program Finance and Administration Committee, adopted the population and employment forecasts in October of 2020. Since then, some things have happened. So we started out questioning if we needed to make an adjustment, especially after the 2020 census counts came out. These counts showed greater population than previously estimated, particularly in New York City. Another reason why we looked at adjusting the forecast is because regional employment in many areas recovered much more quickly from the pandemic than anticipated. There was also a shift, a decentralization in regional growth as settlement patterns and employment changed during the pandemic period. And it was actually already happening. The pandemic just made it move more quickly. And another thing that was brought up is that the New York City forecasts are influenced by housing constraints. Recent federal regulation encourages housing consideration in other subregions, and that had not been done previously with these forecasts. So we're taking this as an opportunity to look at housing considerations. So what did we do to adjust the forecast? First, we collected and analyzed the data and generated preliminary forecasts in cooperation with New York City Department of City Planning. New York City DCP actually creates their own population forecasts. And then those are incorporated with the larger regional forecasts. After generating those preliminary forecasts, we met with the forecast working group for their review and to get their agreement on the forecasts. We've now reached the public meeting stage, and then finally, we hope that PFAC will be adopting the forecasts, the adjusted forecasts. And was housing considered in the forecast update? As I mentioned previously, New York City DCP forecasts have always considered housing constraints. For all other subregions, housing availability and future development has been used to forecast focus the TAS distributions, the smaller level traffic analysis zone distributions of the county forecasts. Now, this update is only an adjustment to the forecasts adopted in 2020, and as such, the forecast methodology was not changed. However, we did prepare a housing check, which looked at the estimate of new units that would be required each year to meet forecasted population growth. This was then compared to an annual average of housing unit permits issued over the past 10 years by county. We took this check and ran it by the forecast working group, and all of the county representatives felt that future demand could be met by the market. NYMTC will continue to evaluate methods to integrate housing information into its future forecasts. And with that, we'll actually get to what the adjusted SED forecasts look like. So first off, we're starting with regional employment. As you can see from the actual data, the pandemic loss was greater than previously estimated. You can see that in the orange line. But also, the recovery was much faster than anticipated as well. So as you can see, the actual employment estimate for 2022 is almost as high as the adopted forecast for 2030. The end result is that on a regional basis, 2055 employment has been adjusted up to 14.195 million. That's a 345,000 job increase over the adopted forecast. Now, this slide shows the distribution of employment among subregions and also looks at the annual average growth rates. So as you can see there, the annual average growth rate between 2020 and 2025 as adjusted is 1.7% per year. Now this reflects the COVID rebound. There's slower rebound growth from 2025 to 2030 at 0.6% per year, after which the forecast shows steady growth of 0.4% each year through 2055. Now, in New York City, the employment adjustments didn't just increase employment in the long term, but it also redistributed that growth among the boroughs. As you can see from the county by county comparisons, Manhattan and the Bronx are expected to see less growth than previously forecasted, while jobs are expected to increase more given the new employment centers in Brooklyn, Queens, and Staten Island. Long Island's adjusted employment forecast shows 160,000 more jobs than previously forecast. That's increases in both Nassau and Suffolk counties, and this reflects to some extent the increased decentralization of work, which was sped up by the pandemic. In the Mid-Hudson, all counties but Ulster saw greater employment growth in the overall adjustments, but even in counties with increased numbers, the values are less than 5%. So there's more job growth in Mid-Hudson than previously anticipated, but not a huge amount. Mid-Hudson didn't see great gains. New Jersey, the counties are split between two slides, but the total you're seeing is the complete subregional total. So they're not going to add up. So in New Jersey, that subregion also benefited from the redistribution of regional employment, with all counties expected to have ultimately greater employment than previously forecast. The adjusted employment reaches 4.29 million by 2055, and Bergen, Essex, Union, Mercer, and Middlesex counties were the greatest recipients of those increases in employment. In Connecticut, reaching 1.14 million jobs by 2055, the adjustments are really quite minimal, with each of the three counties gaining 3,000 to 4,000 jobs over the long-term forecast period. Now, the key employment takeaways: regional employment is expected to grow at an average annual rate of 0.43% per year. That's after 2025. New York City will maintain the largest share of regional employment, but it will be down 1.9 percentage points to 41.6% of the region by 2055. Nassau and Suffolk counties are both anticipated to experience steadily rising job growth, up to 1.65 million in total by 2055. In the Mid-Hudson, Westchester County shows the greatest employment growth, adding 53,000 jobs between 2022 to the adjusted 2055 forecast end period. And in New Jersey, the adjusted 2055 SED forecast projects employment to reach 4.29 million. Moving on to population. The adjusted forecasts are also roughly 300,000 greater than the adopted forecasts in 2055, reaching 26.1 million as a whole. This slide just provides the distribution among the subregions. Looking at New York City's population forecast. Now, as I mentioned earlier, these are prepared independently by New York City's Department of City Planning and were adjusted using their specific methodology. Now, while there were changes in the population numbers through 2050, DCP determined that the adopted forecast for 2055 would be the same for that particular year. So they held the 2055 numbers steady, but the numbers between 2020 and 2050 did change. That's why the comparison chart at the bottom, you can see, is the same for both the adopted and the adjusted forecasts. It's just the interior years that changed. Moving on to Long Island. Long Island's population is now expected to reach 2.85 million by 2055. Nassau County seeing an additional 25,000 people compared to the adopted forecasts, while Suffolk County would gain an additional 20,000 people. The Mid-Hudson's population forecast has been adjusted up to 2.67 million by 2055, but while Orange, Rockland, and Westchester counties have increased compared to the adopted forecasts, Dutchess, Putnam, and Ulster have decreased slightly in numbers. Sullivan actually stayed the same even after the adjustment. So the New Jersey subregion's population is now expected to reach 8.5 million people by 2055, with all counties but Passaic and Mercer seeing the same or greater population growth. And in Connecticut, the Connecticut subregion's population was also adjusted upwards based on newly available data, expecting to reach 2.18 million people by 2055. All of the county areas are seeing small differentials in population by the end year. It's only a 0.7% increase in New Haven County, 1% increase in Fairfield County, and actually a 2% increase over the adopted forecasts in Litchfield County. Now, the main takeaways from the population projections. Again, there was a redistribution of New York City's share of the regional totals. The New York City share of regional population will increase from 33.7% in 2020 to 36.3% by 2055. In the adjusted forecast, Long Island's population is roughly 44,000 persons greater, but it does maintain the same regional share of population at 12.6%. The Mid-Hudson subregion experiences greater growth than anticipated through 2055, partially due to pandemic relocations. New Jersey's subregion will see an annual average increase of 0.4%. with population growth greatest in Hudson, Bergen, and Ocean counties. And Connecticut subregions show limited growth. But while Litchfield County's 2055 population was higher in the adjusted forecast than the previous forecast, the total population has actually continued to decrease. So while the adjustment is up, total population in that county is down. And so then the next steps, the tech memo and county level tables are currently available for public review. We have entered the 30-day public comment period. Hopefully after that, PFAC will adopt the county forecasts, and then the team will work on redistributing the adopted forecasts to the traffic analysis zones, after which the forecast working group will review those TAZ distributions for use in the BPM. And this slide provides information on where you can, or how long you have to provide comments, and where you can find the draft documentation.
That's right. And
Mark?
Yeah, thank you, Tina, very much for that comprehensive detail of the forecast. So this, if there are any comments, folks can unmute and ask questions or comments, or you can type something in the chat. Or of course, there's information here to submit something by email or by mail at any time between now and at 4 o'clock on May 23rd. So we will remain here with the slide on. If anyone has anything they want to add or any questions, we'll be here for a few minutes and then we'll conclude the presentation.